Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast talks about human development and psychology. Hope you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about normative stage models, and starting on good old Carl Jung, or Jung, whichever you want to pronounce it. And that's where we're going to take back up on. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, the first major theorist about adult development, held that healthy midlife development calls for the individuation, and that's the term for emergence of the true self through balancing or integration of conflicting parts of the personality. And we all have conflicting parts of the personality that we have to balance so that we can become a whole person. The emergence of the true self through balancing or integrating conflicting parts of the personality, including those parts that previously have been neglected. And now sometimes we neglect parts of ourselves because we're told by parents or family members or teachers or other kids that it's not a good thing, or we've suppressed things. Like I wanted to get an arts degree, and I was told you can't do it, can't make a living at it, don't bother. And so I didn't do anything artistic for a long time, and then I did something, and the gallery's like, yeah, bring that. And so now I have two more things I got to bring to galleries. So now I'm getting artworks into galleries. So I'm like, well, just imagine if my parents would have been supportive when I was younger, and I could have been working on this, and I would have been a little better at it, and got a little sooner something in there. But sometimes we do that. We suppress parts of us that are not celebrated or told is not good. Until about age 40, said Jung, adults concentrate on obligations to family and society and develop those aspects of personality that will help them reach external goals. Because it's about your family, your job, making a life for yourself. Women emphasize expressiveness, y'all know my tongue, and nurturance, because we do. And men always say we're too emotional, but actually, okay. And we do nurture. We're nurturers. We take care of our kids. Men set primarily oriented towards men are primarily oriented towards achievement, the goal, the money, and that sort of thing. At midlife, people shift their preoccupation to their inner spiritual selves, and that's why a lot of people call it midlife crisis. Here I got a bad shine here, so I'm trying to see where I don't have that shine. Both men and women seek a union of opposites by expressing their previously disowned aspects. And some women, they get into their 50s, they go through menopause, and they get to be downright mean. So you got to watch that too. You got to keep some balance there. Two necessary but difficult tasks of midlife are giving up the image of youth and acknowledging mortality. So I don't look like I did when I was 18 years old, and I'm never going to look like that again. You don't either. And that's just a fact of life. And we're going to have to deal with the fact that we're aging, or we're not young anymore. We don't look like we used to look. We can't do the things we used to do. And someday we're not going to be here anymore. Someday we're going to take our last breath, and that's going to be it. According to Jung, the need to acknowledge mortality requires a search for meaning within the self. Because, we want to leave a legacy, we want to leave something for future generations, whatever it may be. So we're looking for meaning, out of our life, to kind of lay that down so that, future generations can look at it and say, oh, they did this, that, and they did this, so, like I say, because someday we're not going to be here anymore. This inward turn may be unsettling as people question their commitments, because, if you've basically worked at a job that you hate for, 30, 40 years, and now you're like, what did I do with my life? That can be unsettling. They may temporarily lose their moorings, which, again, you get out there, that's, again, the midlife crisis, and you don't know what next, So before you get to the midlife, you might want to thinking about, what next. You might want to have a plan there so you don't wander around the world. But people who avoid this transition and do not reorient their lives appropriately miss the chance for psychological growth. Because if you allow yourself, you will always grow. But if you keep yourself down, you will not. So if you don't, tweak your new life and make your new life something good and useful, you are going to miss some chance for personal growth. Erikson, Generativity versus Stagnation. In contrast to Jung, who saw midlife as a time of turning inward, Erikson described an outward turn, because some people do. They get involved with charities and things and, turn outward. Erikson saw the years around age 40 as the time when people enter their seventh normative stage, generativity versus stagnation. Generativity, as Erikson defined it, is the concern of mature adults for establishing and guiding the next generation. That's your part of your job. Perpetuating oneself through one's influence on those to follow. So you should want to have an influence on those who coming behind you. Looking ahead to the waning of their lives, people tend to feel a need to leave a legacy. And I certainly did. I thought, the charity was going to be my legacy, but evidently not. So, I'm still sitting here trying to teach folks something. So, I feel like I did some good when I'm gone. To participate in life's continuation. People who do not find an outlet for generativity become self-absorbed, self-indulgent, or stagnant, inactive, or lifeless. Back to that midlife crisis. The virtue of this period is care. A widening commitment to take care of the persons, the products, and the ideas one has learned to care for. I'm going to shine my glasses here, or de-shine my glasses here. And at this point in your life, a lot of folks, quit working. They might take care of the grandkids and teach the grandkids things. And, you might get involved in mentoring or, big brother, big sister. And so this point in your life is a good time to do that, when you have some free time to do this. Generativity can be expressed not only through parenting and grandparenting, but through teaching or mentorship, productivity or creativity, and self-generation or self-development. And again, you should always be learning. You should always be tweaking and developing yourself. If you thought you got to be 18 and you're grown and you don't never need to learn anything more, and you never will learn anything more, that's sad. And you're wrong. So, It can extend to the world of work, to politics, art, music, and other spheres. Or, as Erikson called it, maintenance of the world. And that's all of our job. A lot of people think, but no, it is our job to take care of the world. We only got one. In Gandhi's Truth, Erikson pointed out how Gandhi, who was not a good father, emerged as father of his country at age 49. So, his family's probably like, What? Expressing generativity in his concern for the well-being of an entire nation. So, again, sometimes you didn't start out so great and you might end up being pretty great. A later theorist distinguished 4 specific forms of generativity: biological, conceiving and bearing children; parental, nurturing and raising children; technical, reaching skills, teaching them to apprentices; and cultural, transmitting cultural values and institutions. And any of these is good and helpful to the next generations. Regardless of the form, Coulter said, generativity can be expressed in 2 different ways, or styles: communal, involving care and nurturance of others, or agentic, personal contributions to society, creative, scientific, or entrepreneurial. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to contribute to society because it's not looking so good right now. So, that's just my little input. How does generativity arise? According to one model, inner desires for symbolic immortality or a need to be needed combine with external demands in the form of increased expectations and responsibilities to produce a conscious concern for the next generation. And I really dislike it when I hear other people saying, no, I had to do this, and let them fend for themselves, let them generations fend for themselves. No, that's terrible. You're supposed to make their life easier. You're supposed to make their life better. You're supposed to teach them something to help them get to be your age. Excuse me. This, together with what Erikson called belief in the species, leads to generative commitments and actions. And belief in the species means you believe that the species is going to continue. Now, there was a sociologist who said that man had reached his peak in the 70s, and now we're de-evolving. And with what's going on in the world, I kind of hate to agree with him, but it's not looking good. Jung and Erikson's legacy, Vaillant and Levinson. Jung and Erikson's ideas and observations inspired George Vaillant's and Daniel Levinson's longitudinal studies of men. And they studied, just men. Both describe major midlife shifts from occupational striving in the 30s to reevaluation and often drastic restructuring of lives in the 40s to mellowing and relative stability in the 50s. Again, he was noting some of the upheaval of middle age that men have. Vaillant, like Jung, reported a lessening of gender differentiation, my tongue, at midlife, and a tendency for men to become more nurturant and expressive. And that's why grandpas are sometimes better, than they were as fathers. Likewise, Levinson's men at midlife became less obsessed with personal achievement and more concerned with relationships. So, the drive is not as strong. You get more interested in relationships. And that's why a lot of men end up divorced and they don't get remarried till they're, in their 50s or 60s, when they're, at a point in their life where they can be a good partner and nurture the relationship. And they show generativity by becoming mentors to younger men. As Vaillant studied the relationship between generativity and mental health. Vaillant also echoed Jung's concept of turning inward. In the 40s, many of his sample of Harvard graduates abandoned the compulsive, unreflective, busy work of their occupational apprenticeships and once more became explorers of the world within. And we all should be doing that. We should all check in with ourselves every now and then, at least once a day, maybe have a little meditation or, think about, lay in the bed for 5 minutes before you get up. What am I thinking about? What did this dream mean? What am I going to do today? What does this mean? Just kind of get your head straight. Bernice Newgarden noted a similar introspective tendency at midlife, which she called interiority. Interiority, Newgarden's term for a concern with inner life, introversion, or introspection, which usually appears in middle age. Because we're, well, I'm not young anymore, not quite old, so what's going on? Where am I in this stage? For Levinson's men, the transition to middle adulthood was stressful enough to be called a crisis. So, for men, it might be a crisis. The emotionality of, men are driven, and then maybe they don't have to be driven anymore, and they start heading towards old age. It can be a shock, and they're like, oh, and they're not ready, and some men, like I said, the old joke about, divorcing your wife for a newer model and driving your Corvette or whatever. But sometimes men get depressed and go a different way. So, that's not good. If you're having problems navigating, this midlife transition, it's a good idea to go and talk to somebody. There's counselors, psychologists, and get this worked out so that, we don't lose you sooner than we need to. They may not apply in a society in which masculinity and femininity no longer have such distinct meanings, which they don't anymore. We have women in men's jobs and men in women's jobs, and the divide between the sexes basically is only limited now by body size, pretty much. And upper body strength. That's it. And in which career development and life choices for both men and women have become more varied and more flexible. Because, men, like I said, I have a nephew who's stayed home from work because his wife can make more money, and the daycare was going to cost more than what he was making. So, he's a home husband. These findings also may not apply to people for whom economic survival is a pressing issue. So if you're really poor and, you're living hand to mouth, then you're not really going to notice much of a change because you're going to have to keep working. Or to cultures that have very different patterns of life course development. And like I say, some different cultures, there's not that distinction. You basically go from being young to being an adult, and then you're old. So, there's not a recognized middle period in adulthood in some cultures. Timing of events, the social clock. Adult personality, according to the timing of events model, adult personality development hinges less on age than on important life events. And we all know about the milestones, the little baby, they're now taking a bottle, they're now eating food, they're now sitting up, they're now standing up, they're now walking, they're now talking. Every different step you got milestones in your life. Middle age often brings a restructuring of social roles because, we go from being a worker to maybe a manager. We go from being a parent to maybe a grandparent. Launching children, becoming grandparents, changing jobs or careers, and eventually retirement. I'm basically retired. I'm still doing this, trying to bring in a little something because we ain't rich. But someday I hope to retire. For the cohorts represented by the early normative crisis studies, the occurrence and timing of such major events were fairly predictable because it's usually, happens in a normal way for everybody. Today's lifestyles are more diverse. People's social clocks tick at different rates, and a fluid life cycle has blurred the boundaries of middle adulthood because, you can go back and do something you want to do when you're young. You can go back to college. It's not specific as it used to be. The life clock is a lot more fluid now, and time and space are not as hard as they used to be. When women's lives revolved around bearing and rearing children, the end of the reproductive years meant something different from what it means now. Meaning, basically, you became useless. You were an old crone, and you might be good enough to learn, teach the young girls how to cook or something like that. But you were basically useless when you couldn't bear kids anymore. When so many middle-aged women, like Madeleine Albright, have entered the workforce. So, again, some people, once they get their kids grown, might decide to go back to work. And, you might be 40, 50 years old. When occupational patterns were more stable and retirement age 65 was almost universal, the meaning of work at midlife may have been different from its current meaning in a period of frequent job changes. So, again, in most companies, I don't think in any companies here in America, honestly, do you work your 25, 30 years, get your gold watch, and your pension? My grandparents' day, that was a thing. My parents' day, a lot less places. My day, I don't know anyone my age who's getting a pension. They got some 401ks, they got hopefully some savings. I don't know anybody who's going to be getting a pension that's my age. Now, government jobs, I think you're getting one. But for most of us, that's not a thing anymore. Downsizing and early or delayed retirement is a thing. So, again, if you work for a company 20 years, they downsize, you're out of a job. You got to find another one at your age. And, for older folks, that's not always a good thing, because sometimes your skills are not up with the young folks. So it can be hard on older folks. When people died earlier, middle-aged survivors felt old, realizing that they too were nearing the end of their lives. So back in the day, we were looking at stuff on the people from like Daniel Boone's age or whatever. If you're living to 35, 40, you're getting pretty old. Nowadays, 35, 40, you're just now starting, middle-aged, and you got, maybe 60 more years or more left, depending on, how old you live to be. And my saying is, the Lord said the years of man are 120, and so until he tells me different, I'm planning on living to be 120. I'm sure he probably will tell me different, but we'll see. Many middle-aged people now find themselves busier and more involved than ever. Some still raising young children, while others redefine their roles as parents to adolescents and young adults, and often as caregivers to aging parents. Like I said, that sandwich generation, we're being sandwiched. Yet despite the multiple challenges and variable events of midlife, most middle-aged adults seem well able to handle them, because it's our life, and nothing's really a surprise. Things usually come in a certain way, so that if our parents are getting older, we know someday they're going to need a lot of help. If our kids are getting older, we know someday they're going to need us to help them get out into the world. So usually it's not a surprise. Sometimes there are surprising things that pop up, but not normally. The social clock has not stopped altogether, at least in some societies. In one study done in Berlin, Germany, adults of all ages were asked their impression of hypothetical 45-year-old adults of their own sex whose family or work situations violated normal expectations for that age. Participants, regardless of their own age, expressed surprise about these off-time conditions and called them atypical. Because again, you don't expect a young girl to be having children, you don't expect an old woman to be having children. So some events could be seen as atypical. Reactions were stronger and more negative when development seemed late. As for example, when a 45-year-old woman was described as having a 1-year-old child. Reactions were positive when development seemed early or on time. As, for example, when a 45-year-old man was said to be branch manager of a bank. So, a little bit of double standard there. Society, apparently, is not yet age blind. People are sensitive to social clocks and use them to understand and judge others. And, we really shouldn't be judging others. And, if you're 20-something going to school with a 60-something, be nice. Because, they're trying to better themselves and have a better life, in their middle age. So that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope this helped you figure out, excuse me, a little more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time.